Hello again. I was prompted to speak today, which is of course St George's Day, of the way in which English history is being literally torn down and erased, lest some passing foreigner might be offended. We see this in the London borough of Haringey, to give one example, where the old street of Black Boy Lane is being renamed, against the wishes of the residents themselves, incidentally, who are in the main black. More recently, a small statue in the Gloucestershire town of Stroud is being targeted by anti-racists. High above the streets is a striking clock which was constructed 250 years ago. There were only a dozen or so of these clocks left in England. They used to be very common. It features a small black figure which strikes a bell on the hour. It may be seen in the thumbnail to this video. It's barely visible to the naked eye from the street. Nevertheless, the local council is trying to have it removed because, as a group of loonies say, living in the area, as a predominantly white community, we have a responsibility to recognise and understand the dehumanisation and abuse of black and brown people which this statue represents. That's just another illustration of what bloody fools there are in the world. The council also planned to change the name of a street named Black Boys in Dursley. This whole business of calls for the removal of reference to black boys, blackface and statues of black people is offensive to me because it is part of my history and has nothing whatsoever to do with slavery, racism or imperialism. Let me explain. The motif of the black boy and the idea of blacking up one's face, it's a very old one in England, is associated with three aspects of our history, none of them connected in any way at all with slavery or racism. Let's start with blackface. It will be remembered that a group of Morris dancers last year stopped blacking their faces and began using green paint instead, in case they offended black people. This is so utterly grotesque that I hardly know where to begin. Blacking faces in England was an old tradition for poachers and burglars in the 17th century, and almost certainly for a long time before that. The aim was twofold. Firstly, to disguise a person and make it harder to identify him, and secondly, of course, because at night a blacked up face would be harder to see if you were a poacher than a white one would. I have here the Newgate Calendar, which is a chronicle of crime in 18th century England. Let me just read out a little bit here to give some context. Right, this page is an account of Richard Parvin, Edward Elliot, etc., commonly called the Waltham Blacks, who were hanged for murder. The Waltham Blacks. Is that something to do with black people? Well, of course it's not. Because what they did, they went out on their poaching expeditions and at length murdered the Bishop of Winchester's keeper on Waltham Chase, and from the name of the place and their blacking their faces, they obtained the name of the Waltham Blacks. Right. An Act of Parliament was passed called the Black Act in 1723, and the idea was to prevent people from blacking their faces so that they could commit crime. And I'll quote from the Black Act itself. Any person appearing in any forest, chase, park, etc., or in any high road, open heath, common or down, with offensive weapons and having his face blacked, like that carried the death penalty. The Black Act was nothing at all to do with black people. It refers to poachers, thieves and beggars. Morris men blacked their faces because this made them look like poachers or beggars, and it added to the lawless aspect of their summer revels. The whole business of the Morris men was poking fun at authority, poking fun at the established order. Blacking their faces was part of that, by making them look like poachers. It was a conscious imitation of the operations of bandits like the Waltham Blacks. When you see a street in England called Black Boy's Lane or a pub called the Black Boy, this is one source for that name. It's nothing to do with the American habit of referring to adult black men as boy, and anybody who thinks so knows nothing at all about English history. Another source for the image of the black boy was chimney sweeps, who employed climbing boys who went up the chimneys, and they became so ingrained with soot as a result that they were known as black boys. A third way that the idea of the black boy arose was because the black boy was a nickname of King Charles II because of his dark complexion. So that also accounts for some pubs called the Black Boy. They're actually named after King Charles II. In other words, streets and pubs named after black boys are references to centuries-old parts of my history, and I'm annoyed to see that people are determined to destroy this history. It is a fascinating link with the distant past, and I'm damned if I see why it should be severed just because of the sensitivities of immigrant communities or left-wing idiots. It has nothing to do with slavery or race or black people from Africa. It is true that there are some images in this country, paintings and models from long ago in England's past which do represent Africans, but so what? Everybody knows about the fuss regarding the Benin bronzes, which are old brass sculptures which were brought to this country from the area which is now Nigeria, and there are calls for them to be returned to Nigeria because the Benin bronzes are an important part of their history and heritage. Guess what? Some of those Benin bronzes contain representations of white Europeans. So centuries-old representations of white people which were made by Africans are an important part of African history, yes? But centuries-old representations of Africans produced by white Europeans are vile and should be removed from view. They are not a valuable part of our history, you see. The hypocrisy of all this is appalling. And on this day, St. George's Day, I say that we should stand up for English history and resist any attempts to destroy it. Enough is enough. In the description to this video, I give a link to a news item about the Black Boy clock in Stroud and the attempts to have that removed.